Okay, so you guys wanted a deep dive on the Menendez brothers case. Well, ask and you shall receive, right. And the timing honestly couldn't be more perfect. This case is like back from the dead, all over the headlines again.
Yeah, it's wild, right? I mean, this thing was like peak 90s sensationalism, and now suddenly it's front page news all over again. Like all these different threads are weaving together. Celebrity, true crime, changing ideas about justice. It's a lot.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like a recipe for exactly this kind of frenzy, right?
Exactly.
And at the center of it all, of course, we've got Kim Kardashian. And, well, her involvement's definitely, it's gotten people talking, to say the least.
That's one way to put it. I mean, her coming out so publicly advocating for Lyle and Erik Menendez's release, that was a power move for sure.
Totally. It's interesting, though, right? Because it does kind of track with what we've been seeing from her for a while now, this whole push for criminal justice reform.
Oh, absolutely. This is like her thing now, you know? She's been super vocal about it. Remember a few years back when she was instrumental in getting Alice Marie Johnson clemency from Trump?
Oh, yeah. That was huge. I mean, a life sentence for a nonviolent drug offense, gone. Kardashian was like a dog on the bone on that one.
Totally. And now she's doing the same thing with the Menendez brothers, even going on record calling them kind, intelligent, and honest men. Like, wow.
Seriously. She's pointing to their clean prison records, the degrees they've earned, even how they're like caregivers to older inmates now. It's like she's saying, look, people can change, rehabilitation is real.
And that's a really compelling argument, right? But then she takes it even further, right? Like, the core of what she's saying is that if this case went to trial today, the outcome would be totally different. She's bringing in this whole conversation about evolving understanding of abuse and trauma, especially when it comes to men.
Which is huge. I mean, the brothers' whole defense rested on them being abused by their parents, right?
Exactly. And she seems to be saying that back in the 90s, society just wasn't as aware of the long-term effects of that kind of trauma, particularly for men.
Yeah.
And then you layer on top of that the whole #MeToo movement, which has really shifted the landscape, right? Like now there's much wider recognition of how abuse works, how victims might react.
It makes you wonder, like, are we more likely to believe alleged victims now than we were then?
Mm.
And if so, what does that mean for cases like this one?
Right. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? But here's the thing. As much praise as Kardashian is getting for this, there's also a good deal of criticism.
Because it seems like she's picking and choosing which cases to get involved in.
Exactly. People are bringing up cases like Marcel Williams, who was executed despite appeals for clemency. Kardashian didn't touch that one, which, kind of makes you wonder.
Like, is she really all about broad criminal justice reform? Or are there other things factoring into which cases she chooses to champion?
Yeah, it's complicated.
Definitely. So it's not just about the Menendez brothers anymore. It's about this bigger question of who gets a second chance and who decides right.
Absolutely.
And that's a heavy weight to carry, even for Kim Kardashian.
Yeah, no kidding.
And speaking of carrying weight, she's not just talking the talk, like she's actually out there doing the work. I read she's partnered with some rideshare companies to make sure released inmates have a ride home.
Oh, yeah, that's a brilliant move. Think about it. You're released after years, decades, inside, and then what? You don't even have a way to get back on your feet, literally.
Wow. Yeah, I never thought about that.
Right. It's these practical things that often get overlooked in this whole conversation about justice reform.
Totally. And it all kind of circles back to her legal career goals.
Okay.
Right, which that's a whole other layer to this onion.
Right.
But before we peel back that layer, let's talk about how Kardashian being involved has, kind of blown this whole thing wide open.
Yeah.
Like the LA County District Attorney is actually reviewing new evidence now because of all this. It's crazy.
Yeah, talk about impact. I mean, it's definitely possible she's single-handedly resurrected a decades-old legal battle.
Right. It's like, did Kim Kardashian just become the most powerful lawyer in LA or something?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. The DA is taking a second look, yeah, but what that actually translates to, we'll have to wait and see.
Sure.
Will this new evidence actually be enough to overturn the original verdict? Could there be a retrial? It's all up in the air still.
Okay, so we've got this whole real-life legal drama going down, fueled by, of all people, Kim Kardashian.
Right.
But then on top of that, we have this whole other layer, this pop culture phenomenon that's also feeding into the whole conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Ryan Murphy's Netflix series, Monsters. The Lyle and Erik Menendez story.
Yeah, that's where things get even more interesting, I think, at least from like a storytelling perspective. It's been massively popular, no doubt, but it's also gotten slammed, like a lot of criticism for how it portrays Well, pretty much everything.
Oh, tell me about it. It was like #1 on Netflix for weeks,
Yeah.
but it also stirred up like a ton of controversy.
For sure. One of the biggest things people are freaking out about is how the series implies there was this incestuous relationship between Lyle and Erik.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And that's something that both brothers have completely denied. Like, Erik Menendez even came out and called it vile and appalling.
Yeah.
Said the whole series was based on lies.
Wow. So then it's like, okay, what responsibility do these creators have, right, when they're dealing with real people, real events, especially when it's something as serious and sensitive as this?
It's a huge question. And it kind of gets to the core of this whole debate around true crime, right? Like, as a genre, can it ever be responsible? Can you tell these stories without just exploiting the victims, their families? Or does entertainment, by its very nature, always lean towards sensationalism?
It does feel like kind of a slippery slope.
Yeah.
And it's not just the incest issue that has people riled up, right? Like, the way this series portrays abuse in general has been really criticized.
It's true. I read one critic who described it as this weird mix of like Tarantino-esque violence, but then also these moments that are trying to be sensitive to the realities of childhood sexual abuse. Like, the series couldn't figure out what lane it wanted to be in.
Yeah, like trying to have it both ways. And I've seen some critics saying that ultimately Monsters is just more concerned with shock value than actually, helping people understand what happened.
Which is a shame.
Yeah.
It's important to say, though, that Ryan Murphy, the guy who created the series, he's defended his approach. He says he was going for, like, a Rashomon effect style of storytelling.
Hold on. For those of us who aren't, like, film studies majors, what does that even mean?
Oh, right, sorry. Basically, it means you're seeing the same events, the same story, from multiple points of view. So it's not about saying, like, this is the absolute truth, but more about giving the audience different pieces of the puzzle and letting them draw their own conclusions.
Huh. Interesting.
Right. And Murphy's even gone so far as to say that this series, Monsters, is the best thing that has happened to the Menendez brothers in 30 years.
Whoa. That's a bold statement.
To say the least.
But, I mean, is he right? Like, even with the multiple perspectives, even if it gets people talking, is it possible a series like this could actually do more harm than good?
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about these really serious abuse allegations. Like, there's real potential to re-traumatize the people involved,
Oh, absolutely. And that's really what it comes down to, isn't it? Monsters has definitely gotten people talking about male sexual abuse trauma, but has it been done responsibly? Or has it just made everything more confusing, more muddled by throwing in all these fictionalized elements? It's messy, for sure. It's like, on one hand, you've got Kim Kardashian, who built her entire career on reality TV, and now she's like knee-deep in this real-life legal battle. And then you've got Ryan Murphy, this super powerful creator who's simultaneously drawing attention to the case, but also stirring up all this controversy with his take on it. It's a lot to unpack. It really is a lot to wrap your head around. Like, we're talking about real people here, real trauma. And it's like this weird gray area between like fighting for justice and, I don't know, almost like turning tragedy into entertainment.
Yeah, for sure.
Makes you think.
It really does. And honestly, it feels like the more we dig into this, the more questions come up. What about all this is really hitting home for you? Like, what's sticking with you? I think for me, it keeps coming back to this idea of like how differently we see things now, Like, what if the Menendez brothers were on trial today? Would it even be the same conversation? Would people be more likely to believe them now with everything we know about abuse and trauma?
Right. And that's such a fascinating question because it gets to how much society has changed, even just in the past few decades. Like, think about it. The Menendez trial happened before people were even really using the term sexual abuse.
Wow. Yeah, that's true.
Right. Like, we've come a long way in terms of even just understanding what trauma does to people, how it affects them long term, and especially when it comes to men, right? That's something we're only really starting to talk about openly.
Yeah. And you have to think about the impact of the #MeToo movement too, right? That's definitely changed how we look at these kinds of allegations, how seriously we take them.
For sure. #MeToo created this whole space for people to come forward, share their experiences, and it forced everyone to listen, It challenged those old ways of thinking about power, consent,
right.
What actually constitutes abuse. It's impossible to separate that from how we see a case like this now.
Totally. So then it's like, okay, if society's understanding of these issues is evolving, does the legal system have the ability to keep up? Like, can we really look back at a case like this decades later and factor all that in?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the LA County DA is going through new evidence right now, but Who knows what'll actually happen? Will this actually lead to something concrete? Could the original verdict actually be overturned, or are we stuck with this? Like dissonance between what we know now and what happened then.
It does feel like we're at some kind of turning point, but we just don't know which way it's going to go.
Right. That's what makes this whole thing so captivating, though, right? That tension. We're grappling with these huge, huge questions here. Like, what does justice actually look like? Can it ever truly be served in a case like this? A case that's so messy and complicated and where so much time has already passed.
So much to think about.
Yeah.
But hey, that's what we're here for, right? These deep dives. To really dig into the messy stuff, ask the hard questions. Sometimes, I guess, just sit with the fact that we might not have all the answers.
Exactly. Because honestly, sometimes just having the conversation, keeping it going, that's the most important thing.
Well said. So to everyone listening, we want to hear from you. What do you think is going to happen next? And more importantly, given everything we've talked about today, the changing attitudes towards abuse, this renewed interest in the Menendez brothers case, the possibility of new legal developments, what does justice look like to you? What would it take for you to feel like, okay, this feels right? Keep those questions in mind as you keep following this story, because this conversation, well, it's far from over.